I'm Steph.
And I'm Jeff. Each week, we review a film that's streaming on Netflix or Amazon Prime.
As writers, we'll deep dive into the hook, plot, characters, and ending to tell you if it's a good story.
Listen at your own risk. This review contains spoilers.
Now sit back
Relax
and
enjoy Stream On.
Today, we'll be discussing The Vast of Night, streaming right now on Amazon Prime.
After hearing an eerie, otherworldly sound, a switchboard operator and DJ search for the source. What they find is a world of hidden stories and aliens. They also find aliens.
Yes, this is a sci-fi movie. Vast of Night was directed by Andrew Patterson. It is his debut film as a director. And it was also written by him as well as Craig Sanger and James Montague. And it stars Sierra McCormick as Faye Crocker and Jake Horowitz as Everett the Maverick Sloan. So, Jeff, why did you pick this film?
I actually heard about this film on a YouTube movie review channel that I listen to or watch, and it sounded intriguing. So I watched it and I'm like, this is a perfect example of how to generate emotional investment and plot tension through dialogue, soundtrack, and image framing. And it's a amazingly well-paced story, has some interesting things to say about storytelling, and is, I thought, beautifully acted. There are some long, unbroken scenes with a single character who has to do a bunch of stuff that are just mesmerizing. So I thought it was an amazing film. We have to do this.
Yeah, I have to say for this guy's directorial debut, it was a strong debut, and he did a lot with a small budget. So we'll get into that as we talk about the film. So what did this film remind you of?
There are two parts to this. So one of the things is that a framing device that the movie uses is that of a Twilight Zone-ish 50s TV show, Paradox Theater.
Right. It's basically a knockoff of Twilight Zone.
One of the hallmarks of the best Twilight Zone episodes was the incursion of the weird into the normal world. Serling often and his stable of writers often had like average people encountering weird shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of this reminded me obviously of that, and clearly the filmmakers, that was planned. They're like, this is going to be a Twilight Zone-ish sort of episode. It also reminded me of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah, makes sense. Alien movie.
Alien movie, you have average characters who experience something extraordinary and have to kind of try to find out what's going on. There are some very definite visual cues that reference Close Encounter, especially near the end. The only big difference is that and I don't want to get too much in the ending yet, but the ending of this is bleaker than the one for Close Encounters. So I'd say it's a mix of Close Encounters and your kind of the feel of the Twilight Zone.
Yeah. I could definitely see both of those. I chose X-Files, which, another alien genre, because there was an investigative quality to it. Our two main characters, Faye and Everett, were trying to investigate this mysterious signal coming through over the air. It's like Mulder and Scully going out and investigating, what's going on in this small town in America. I mean, I was a huge X-Files fan back in the 90s, and I definitely had that vibe just set further into the past because this takes place in like the 1950s. So yeah, it reminds me of X-Files, either the TV show or movie. It could be either a little bit more like the X-Files TV show, I would say. It just felt like a longer TV show episode than more of a movie. And of course, aliens.
Of course.
It's a common theme. So the hook, did this movie grab you in the first 15 minutes, Jeff?
The hook ends a little bit later. So it's right at the 22-minute mark where Faye, who is our switchboard operator, she hears an odd sound. Everything prior to that is really building up this interesting layered environment these characters live in, and then introducing us, I thought, masterfully to the two protagonists, Faye and Everett. There's this extended sequence following Everett as he's going through a high school gymnasium where a basketball game is about to start. And it is such an immersive moment where you get to feel for the whole town. You almost immediately get the theme of storytelling with this continually recounted story of a squirrel chewing through a wire.
Right. That's the big story in small town Cayuga, New Mexico.
You also get this idea, though, of how the truth is unreliable. The people's recall, people's memories, and people's stories are unreliable things. The reason I say that is in the first few minutes, this idea is that Everett is told that one of the school officials is looking for him to help repair an electrical problem. It turns out he's not looking for him, he's looking for somebody else. All these people are operating in a world where what they think is real may not be real. This to me is a great hook. This just like grabbed me, and I wanted to see more of these characters and this small town world, and then the weirdness that starts happening. So yes, very effective.
So, so for me, I have to say I disagree. I didn't love the hook. Overall, I think this is a good film, but the hook annoyed me a bit. So it takes place in, it sets you up for like this Friday Night Lights in small town America. It's Cayuga, New Mexico, and everyone is hubbed around this basketball game, which you get. That's like one of the biggest things going on in Cayuga in some time. And Everett's like racing through the gym, trying to help them out with what's going on with their audio. Like it's apparently there's an issue with the squirrel chewing through the wire or whatever. He's like the local disc jockey basically. He meets Faye, who's an aspiring audiophile as well, and she just got a tape recorder that she's super excited about. And it's kind of like a kid's toy to Everett, but he helps her with it. So they go around and they practice her using the tape recorder with people in their cars and just people going to the game, and just interviewing them really about nothing. But you get the sense that Faye is sort of like a puppy to Everett.
Yeah.
Like she's like really wants to learn and absorb and be better. And she's a switchboard operator. And she wants to be a bigger switchboard operator one day. That's her goal in life. I guess she says college would be great, but yeah, her goal in life is to be a bigger switchboard operator. So not a lot of opportunity in the small town. But I think what annoyed me about the first 15 minutes, or I guess 22 minutes, depending on where you mark it, is I had to watch it twice. He talks so fast with a cigarette in his mouth, so it's a little bit like it's not clear his enunciation, and they use a ton of slang. Like I felt like they overdid it, the screenwriting, they overdid it with the 1950s slang. It almost took me out because I felt it was just too over the top. Maybe that's how people talked back then, but it felt over the top to me, this 1950s slang. And because of how fast he was talking with the slang, with the cigarette in his mouth, I had to watch it twice to like with subtitles on to make sure I got everything. um and so I didn't like being annoyed in the first 15 minutes of the film trying to like follow the dialogue versus just kind of sit back, relax, and like engage in the story. Now the story definitely picks up from there and gets more interesting, but it didn't sell me in the first 15 minutes.
Well, I don't agree with what you're saying. I completely understand it. He does use, actually, both of our protagonists use a fair amount of slang, but he uses a lot of it, and he has this kind of pit a pat sort of speaking style. For me, though, it was less about what he was saying. It was more about the tone and the kind of glibness, and that he's just sort of this initially comes across as this kind of nice but kind of superficial dude. And you're supposed to like, to me, it was more of a character trait or character building mechanism through dialogue, less what he's saying specifically. So I thought it worked as far as character building.
He's condescending a bit to Faye too. Like I feel like he's he's a
Oh,
know-it-all
yeah.
type, and it comes across as condescending to Faye.
I mean, they're friends, and there's clearly that kind of affection there. But yeah,
Hmm.
I agree. The whole idea that I think he does see her kind of like the little sister sort of thing. And maybe this is more plot, but whatever. Faye is identified as being 16 years old. Everett, though, isn't that much older. I don't know if he's supposed to be like a senior at that high school and then just works as a DJ. My impression was he's more like 1920. So these are fairly young people.
Yeah, my impression was like he had graduated high school not that long ago, and he was like maybe like 2 years out of high school or something. That there was maybe a 4-year age difference between
I
the
could
two
see
of
that. Yeah,
them.
yeah. But I do get that. It's that, yeah, he's supposed to, he does look at her kind of this little sister sort of thing. I don't know. It works for me.
And she's crushy on him.
Oh, she definitely is. There's a scene where he's talking about leaving for a big city DJ job, and this is where the whole college thing comes up. Where she says, "Well, I can't go to college. I can't afford it. I'm just going to go to another switchboard." But there's some really nice acting there because when he's talking about leaving, and he doesn't
Yeah,
say, "You should come with
yeah,
me" or something dumb like that, right? The look on her face is like, "Aw, my run real buddy's leaving." The other thing too, though, is it's in the hook that I like is they set up how tight this community is. Everyone knows everybody.
yeah. It's definitely quintessential small town USA.
Well, and also these two characters, unlike a lot of movies, and even like some like the X Files, since you brought that up, these characters are not outsiders. Everyone seems
Right.
to like them. They're like functional members of the community. It's not like the two usually be in a lot of these movies like some weirdo, right? Or like the weird sci-fi geek and his geeky girlfriend or whatever. It's like no, these are just kind of your normal residents of this town, and then something weird happens to them. I would recommend if someone watches this, have the subtitles on because that early dialogue goes rapidly and there is a lot of
Yeah.
slang thrown in. So I agree
It's
with
a
that
lot
completely.
all at once, and you have to pay attention to it. It's not one where you can just sort of relax yourself into the film. So yeah, I think the hook would have been better if he slowed down his speech. You still could have gotten the bravado of the character through, and a slightly less slang. And I didn't mind like the story itself of what they were doing, of how they introduced the characters in the basketball game in the small town and interviewing the people and her trying out a tape recorder. It was just the pace of it was too much.
Okay,
So
I can definitely
okay,
see
so
that.
the plot and the characters. So one thing that I had read about this film is it's loosely based on the Kecksburg UFO incident.
Yes.
Do you know anything about? I was going to ask you because you like the paranormal stuff, so I figured you would know. I don't know anything about the Kecksburg UFO incident.
This took place in the late 60s. I think it was either 66 or 68. And a UFO came down in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, or allegedly. And the kind of interesting or memorable part of this story is that a bunch of locals swear that they saw the U.S. military moving this acorn-shaped ship from this woods from the crash site.
So the theme, I guess the loose base of it is it's all the locals saying they're seeing something and that there's a military involvement and a UFO. It's not necessarily the audio signals, it's a ship that crashed in Kecksburg.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I could see that then. It's definitely loose, but
I actually read the same thing, and I was like, okay. I know what Kecksburg is. I'm not certain how tight it is. I mean, this really is more like a Close Encounters thing, right? Where people just are exposed to something otherworldly and then are trying to track things down. So if that's the UFO incident that the writer picked or got inspiration from, that's fine. But honestly, I think it was more, he probably got inspiration from Close Encounters. But
right, or just an old episode of Twilight or Twilight Zone or X Files. So yeah, so it moves you into the story. So basically, they leave the high school where the basketball game is going on. Faye has to work as a switchboard operator, so you see her going in and doing her switchboard thing, and then you see Everett, the Sloan Maverick, going, or the Maverick Sloan, going to his local radio station to do the disc jockey thing for the night. And I have to say that Faye, I think this is the scene you were mentioning earlier, that the actress Sierra McCormick does a really good job. It's a long scene of her operating the switchboard and like hearing this mysterious like humming signal coming through. And I think that was a single shot that she acted
yes.
that in, and it keeps you engaged. You have to be a pretty good actress to keep someone engaged in such a long scene where it's just operating a switchboard. But she keeps you engaged. There's that attention.
Well, and there's also a nice buildup of weird things happening, right? Because like she's getting calls from people say they see something in the sky, and then the calls dropped, and then she hears something on the radio. That entire scene just was well done, and she does a great job of. But also, the director did a great job of taking what could have been a really boring sequence and
Hmm.
making it something that actually is engaging, where you can feel tension building up, and it's almost 100% based on one actress reacting to people, on the phone and then that kind of build up of that sense of weirdness from all the calls coming in and the weird sounds she's hearing. So that
Yeah, and
was
the pace
really
of
well
like
done.
she's moving the switchboard around, trying to get everyone, trying to piece it together, and then get Everett on the line. And yeah, I mean, it's given the budget this film had, it was a great use of a small budget, and acted well. So yes, that's where I could see where people are like, this is a director to watch because he did so much with so little.
Well, there's a scene later where we basically get I'll say, tour of the town in what appears to be one unbroken shot.
Oh, that was beautifully done. Yeah.
Right, the camera is kind of roving through the entire town and starts with our protagonist and winds up back at the basketball game. But you not only get a real sense of the spatial nature of the town, where everything is, but also this idea that there is something moving through the town, that you're like
Mhm.
almost seeing the town from this otherworldly point of view.
Yeah, it's like this entity is lurking around the town, like
Yeah.
scoping it out, looking for its victims. But yeah, that was an amazing shot. Like and then the music set to it was good, and I was that was I think probably my one of my favorite parts of the film was just how well that was shot, and just like yeah, you felt immersed in Cayuga.
Now, as far as the plot itself, though, it's not complex. I mean, so that's
No.
why it's a fairly linear plot. These
Yeah, and
characters
it's
over
a
the course
shorter
of one.
film too. Like
Yeah,
it doesn't drag out a non-complex plot, which I like. Like it doesn't try to stretch it into 2 hours because it's not a
I,
plot that really warrants 2 hours.
I do have a question about two scenes, and I'm interested in your take on these. So, fairly early in the movie, a former serviceman calls in to Everett's radio stations, like, "Hey, I've heard this sound," because Everett plays like a recording of the sound over the radio and asks people to call in if they've heard it.
Yeah, if you know the sound, if you've heard it, like, any tips basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So this guy calls in, and it's a fairly long scene. It's, I don't know, a couple of minutes, right? Of just literally this guy, you're just listening to this guy talking because you never see him. It's everything is from Everett and Faye's point of view. And then the second one where they find someone, an older woman living in Cayuga, and there's a long sequence of her just basically telling her story and how she has encountered this kind of weird alien stuff before. But a lot of it is just like the camera's locked on her face. You don't even see a lot of reaction shots.
Yeah, and there was with Billy, I mean, there were times when it was just a black screen and all you're
Yes.
doing is listening to him. It's because of how the director built up the tension around the signal and because of the acting that didn't take me out of the film. Like I was okay with the lack of visual because this film is so focused on these two audio files and the audio is key. I thought that that was intentional on the director to pull out the visual there and just
Mm-hmm.
have you
Yeah.
listen to really hear the person's story. Just like someone, it's like you're the guy at the radio station listening to the story. You're not meant to see what Billy looks like on the other side. And so I think that it was the whole immersion thing, trying to get you into the film. So I think that worked for me.
Well, the storytelling aspect is clearly the main theme of the movie. How people interact with each other, how they tell stories, why they tell stories, how stories are often unreliable. I
Hmm.
mean, one of my favorite little bits is the radio station apparently has this gimmick going on where if you call in and do something, they will send you a piece of carpet from like Elvis's home.
Obviously, it's not Elvis's carpet. Faye thought it was, but
And that's what I thought was interesting because it's like, oh no, this was just a story. And the idea is funny because he's like, well, at first we did, but of course we ran out of it. So now we're just making it up. And there's a lot of that where all of our storytellers, there's a certain amount of unreliability about them. Even there's an early scene when Faye and Everett are going through the parking lot of the high school doing their little interviews, and she's talking about some war movie where she heard somebody say bacon, bacon.
right, and it's Breaker Breaker, but she misheard it. Yeah.
But it's interesting because she's going through this as like, again, how she is processing stuff and it's incorrect. And that actually then, at least up to the end, kind of lends this idea that how much of what people are telling is right. Are these all unreliable narrators, right?
Right. Well, because it's all filtered through your own perceptions. There's a scene where she talks about in the future this is going to happen, and in the future that's going to happen, and it's like her version based on what she's reading. Which is funny because some of the things are like pseudo what is happening in the future.
What was it? Everett says of the three technologies he describes, which are electronic roads, vacuum tube trains,
Hmm.
and basically
A
smartphones.
smartphone, yeah.
But Everett's like, oh, I think those first two will happen. But we're never going to have the little smartphone.
So I don't know what your thoughts are, but I didn't find Everett's character likable. I found him annoying, condescending, superficial. I felt like even when he was listening to Billy's story, he wasn't super supportive of Billy. I mean, he let Billy keep talking, but he was more focused on him and, oh, this is good radio, than about really caring about Billy. Because he says, Everett says multiple times in the film, because Faye's worried, are we getting in trouble or whatever? He's like, I don't care, it's good radio. I don't care, it's good radio. I mean, his character annoyed me. Faye's character I liked, but maybe Everett they meant him to be that way as a character.
I liked both characters, and I see your point about how Everett is introduced and how the character plays out. That there is that kind of glib, like I said, he has that kind of glib, slang heavy patter he uses, right? The way he communicates with people. And yes, with both Billy and then later with I forget her name,
The old
older
lady,
woman that they
yeah.
interview, he repeatedly mentions, hey, this better be true kind of thing. Then he comes across as kind of willing to listen, but skeptical, right?
Yeah, willing to listen, but skeptical and somewhat dismissive of their stories because he's so skeptical. Like I felt like with both Billy and the old lady, it was more about Everett getting the story and about than it was about caring about the people on the other end of the story. I think
Well, and I
that's why
think,
I didn't like him. It was more focused on Everett. It was a little selfish.
well, one of the things too is that he clearly thinks something odd is happening, right? But he has predetermined what it is. He repeatedly says, oh, I think this is the Soviets doing this.
Right. And that's very, 1950s Cold War scare, like makes sense that he would think that that could be that.
Right, but then when he hears people saying, "Oh, it's aliens," or talking about abductions and stuff, and he's just like, "Okay, bye." But I kind of get that because he's approaching things from that kind of skeptical, materialistic look. That it's the thing we know, not the thing we don't know. And Faye comes across, and I think this is at least why I agree that she's a more approachable, accessible character. She just seems more open, but also she's just spunkier. She's like, I want to get out there and solve stuff.
I don't know. She seems like she's more genuine and authentic as a person. Everett is, there's just this superficial veneer to him. And that's probably because of his years of being a disc jockey or whatever. But yeah, it was just kind of, I don't, but maybe he was meant to act the character that way. So it could have worked for what he was trying to do with that character.
He never really says this explicitly, but like with the Elvis stuff and this way he interacts with people, he is somebody who tells stories not just for a living, but just for his life. This is what he does. He tells people stories. He makes stuff up. He can be deceptive. Then what happens is that character has something real that he can understand intrude on his world, and we can see what happens.
So back to Billy. I mean, the film does do a little bit of social commentary here with Billy. So Billy, tells a story of he's a former Air Force guy, and he was ordered to work on a base, which sounds like an Area 51 type of secret base, where he and some fellow guys, saw like a UFO wreckage. They heard the same mysterious humming sounds. They got a lung condition afterwards, and were getting sick because of exposure to it. And one thing Billy brings up as he's telling the story is he thinks that they purposely chose him to work on that base because he was black, and that everybody else that worked there was either black or Mexican. And he said the reason they chose us is because who's going to believe us? And I thought that was interesting that the film went there. What are your thoughts on that?
This definitely is a commentary on marginalized voices. All the characters, with the exception probably of Everett, are people who, in that time period, would have been marginalized.
Yeah.
Billy is minority. The old woman they interview is both a woman and elderly.
And she had a
Faye,
child. She had a child out of wedlock, the old woman.
right?
Yeah.
You know, Faye's a young girl who's going to listen to her. Everett is the closest thing to like the white male patriarch figure, but he's also purposely kind of marginalize himself, the way he interacts with people. He
Yeah.
does, so these characters, the idea
He
is
sees
the
them as
voices.
subjects. I think that what he instead of seeing it like genuine connection, it's more their
Mhm.
subjects to get their story for his radio program.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the social commentary thing is it makes sense context of the film if they're trying
Hmm.
to give voice to the marginalized, and those are the characters they're highlighting between Faye, Billy, who's black, and the old lady who's white, but she was marginalized because she had her son Hollis out of wedlock, which we'll get to
Right.
later in the story. And that sometimes these people, like, they're saying, hey, here's the truth, here's what's going on, but people aren't listening to their stories because they're marginalized and they're not given the same voice. And Billy has tried to tell like his story, like he talked sort of amongst his friends about it, but now he
Right.
decided enough's enough, I'm going to tell my story and get it on the radio so that I cannot be silenced anymore. I'm old, I'm sick, people need to hear my story.
Right.
So I like that. And the one thing he said is everybody only knows pieces. Like the military purposely sort of segmented, like they had one group working on one base and another group working with the wreckage and another group working here. And so they purposely did that. They used minorities at these locations, and they also um, like split up the information so no one person knew it all, to try to purposely keep it confusing about the truth that aliens are out there. And I think that's a common thing we hear with like conspiracy theories about aliens is
Sure.
how information is very siloed in these like specialized compartment intelligence things.
No, I agree with that. And it also reinforces that theme that, this, again, this storytelling theme and this unreliability of our memories and our perceptions is that we all only have pieces of what's really happening.
Right, and it's filtered through how we view the world. Like either Faye would be more open minded or Everett would be more skeptical. Like with Everett, it's the Soviets. With Faye, she's more open to the idea of aliens. So yeah, I thought that whole scene worked really well, and the way it ended was, Billy talks about how he had a buddy, a fellow radar operator, who was became obsessed with this signal, this humming noise, and was like tried to record it, and eventually he was able to, after many years, get a recording, and then he sent tapes to fellow people that had kept in touch that it had also experienced this noise and had worked on these bases. And so one of the tapes got mailed to a local Cayuga resident, just so happens,
Right.
Raymond Buck, that because Billy destroyed his tapes. So they're really hoping that they can find this tape. When they track it down, they realize that he died, but that he donated his tapes to the library. Well, Everett's like, the library doesn't have a tape recorder, and Faye's like, yes, it does. Like he like immediately dismisses, like he knows everything, and Faye's like, no, it's got one in the basement. I know. So she goes and like races through town to like get the tape, and even though it's just such a small thing, like getting the tape in the library, it's so well done how she's like running through the town. She's always running.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't have another means of transportation, so she's like running rapidly around this town, trying to get pieces to fill in the puzzle. So that like leads us on the, okay, well, what's going to be on this tape? That was well done. And at some point, we get the long shot through the town. I think it's around this time in the movie where they do that really cool, like as she's running to get the tape. I think that's where they do the long shot. I can't
Is it
recall
there or is
exactly.
it after the woman tells her story?
Yeah, I don't
Because
recall.
she
It's kind of through
mentions,
the halfway mark of the
I think it
movie.
might be after the older woman tells her story, because she mentions that the aliens come back when there is something happening that takes most of the people in town and puts them on location.
Ah, so they can isolate a few people, like back to that, the few people that aren't at the location, that aren't at the in crown, that are more maybe marginalized or isolated, so that they can have them separated from everybody that's in the in crowd in the game. Back to that sort of marginalization theme. Um, so yeah, so they get the tape and they play it, and after a few duds, they find it. They hear the signal, At that point, that's where the power goes out, right? They
Right.
play the tape and then the power goes out in the town. So then you get this sense that there is something happening with the signal, that it's connected with the electricity in the town. And it gets back to the beginning of where there's power issues going on in the town. Maybe it's not a squirrel chewing through the wire. Maybe it's the aliens messing with like the electrical grid in the town. That's what I thought at that moment, that the alien ships or whatever are interfering.
Yeah, see, that's another thing that goes back to Close Encounters, actually, because there's a couple of scenes where the aliens show up and blackouts follow that in their wake. There's escalating what the aliens are doing. They're getting ready to do a thing, which they do a thing at the end.
Yeah, that's what I took it as too. And then so then a woman calls in, the old woman that we mentioned, saying, I have some information you're going to want to hear about what's going on. And so, of course, then they go interview the old lady to figure out what she knows about the situation. And there's a scene as they're like going to her house. I can't remember like what he says, but he's like, I hurt girls' feelings a lot. Oh, he's criticizing her tape recorder. That's it. He's like basically saying she's like, "Well, I have my tape recorder. We can use that to interview the lady." And he's like, "No, I'm going to bring my equipment. It's much better." And he's like, "Yours is like a child's toy." And and it was just really patronizing. And then he mentions how he knows he hurts girls' feelings a lot. So at least he's somewhat attuned to the fact that he is um not the most empathic human being. Um, but you can still, even with that, Faye's still kind of crushing on him. So then they go interview the old lady, and this is where things get a bit strange. What did you think of that scene?
What, like her story?
Well, yeah, it was just like the chanting. Remember, she was like chanting like that
Well,
like
that does fit
strange
into some.
language.
That actually fits into a couple of things. Back to the. I know I keep going back to Close Encounters, but this movie has a lot of little Easter eggs for that. That actually references like this tonal communication that the aliens in Close Encounters use. So I think that's a nod to that movie.
Hmm.
But also it's just the idea of external information coming in. The aliens, if you will, are kind of telling their own story, and they're doing it in this weird language. I thought it worked, and it pays off a little later.
Yeah, it's a weird scene, but it works for the film. I would agree with that. Like they come in and she's like all the way in the back room of her house. You get the idea that she's like a shut in, and she's chanting this strange language, and she talks about how she had a child out of wedlock, and that the father of the child died. He was like an electrician or something, and he was putting in lights in like a cave tourist attraction
For a
and
tourist
died.
attraction. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It was so sad. And so anyway, she was left to raise her son Hollis on her own and was a bit ostracized. Yeah, like people were kind to her, but they kind of kept her at a distance because she's this like single mom with this kid. And Faye, incidentally, she doesn't have a dad either. She also, it's just her and her mom. That her dad, I think, was her dad died. I believe. I'm not sure. We don't get the full backstory there.
He's just not there.
Yeah, he's just not there. So there's that like common connection. That makes Faye a little bit different than everyone else in the town that comes from like a normal, like, well, 1950s sense of normal two parent household. She tells this story of like this large windmill sound. And that's when her son, who was very young at the time, started doing the mutterings. That's what she called them, these strange like chants in a different alien language. And then he was age 9 and he walked out the front door and just vanished. And she talks about like seeing his footprint. It was dry out and she saw his footprints and they just stopped and that's it. And so you get the sense that she believes the aliens abducted her 9-year-old son, and that nobody believes her about it. She's just the crazy old lady, of course. And then she launches into this whole thing. Like Everett's already not believing her, and he's like, "Okay, yeah, your son's abducted." Faye's a little bit more like willing to listen, and then she launches into the whole thing about alien mind control, which I loved. Actually, I thought that was a good speech. Do you remember that part?
Oh yeah, no, it's a major part, and actually, that also ties in with this idea that reality is not what we think it is. Because right, her whole thing is basically people being distracted by stuff up to nations going to war. She thinks aliens do all this. And what
It's
was it? I think the
everything's
line.
aliens.
I think the line is "free will is impossible with them up there," which is
Yes,
also
yes.
kind of an interesting stab at religion. But I'm not going to go there. Definitely though, it really kind of reinforces that theme of the unreliability of our perceptions. We're not masters of our fate; they are.
And so then it ends like, okay, Everett's like, we're done. Thank you for your time. Like trying to like shoo Faye out of there. And it ends with her plea of like, take me to your ship. Like, sort of like, she's like, take me with you. I want to see my son. And they're like, no. um, and to kind of feel sad for her. She's like alone in the back room of her house, like missing her 9-year-old son. And all she wants to do is see him again. And she thinks this is her chance. And doesn't sound like she can just get out on her own. She would need someone to help her get out because of how elderly she is. And you feel sad that they don't entertain that for her. And she tries to give them, and this is the like a key part of the movie too, is she tries to give them like a slip of paper and say, hey, when you encounter them, read this. Then it's one of the mutterings, and they don't take the paper. And you wonder what would have happened if they took the paper.
Well, also, this movie does do it drops interesting ideas and doesn't develop them, but in a kind of a naturalist way, not like, oh, this is a drop plot point. Like when she assumes they're either going to be abducted or they're aliens. Why does she assume that? Because they just show up and ask her about this? But she does, right? I mean, as you said, she says, take me with you to their ship. How does she know where they're going to go? And it's just one of those things. It's like, it's kind of neat, and she's an interesting character who has one long scene, and I don't need to like see all of her thought processes. That piece of paper is fascinating. Just that whole idea. It's something we never figure out what it is.
Yeah, it's
I like that.
frustrating because you want to know like what if would that have. I mean, this gets into the ending, which but you wonder if they had had that piece of paper, would it have ended differently for them? Maybe it's sort of like a protective chant.
Well, see, that's one thing that's I find interesting about this story, and like that point right there, that moment. If the story is really about how we tell stories to each other and why we do it, you could almost look at it like that's a little, I want to say like a bonus prize to the attentive viewers, so they can actually then do what we're doing is tell our own stories about what would have happened if they would have taken that piece of paper. This goes back to why I like this movie so much. This is such a well plotted film. It's simple in the sense of the plot is fairly linear. There's not a lot of huge twists and turns, but all the things kind of reinforce like the main points of the story.
hmm
And there's very little to nothing that I found in it that's just wasted moments.
Yeah, I would agree. Other than the beginning, the hook, which annoyed me, I think everything else worked together to move this story along. So the ending. So basically, after they leave the old lady's house, Faye realizes that her baby sister, she needs to get her baby sister Maddie because the babysitter Ethel isn't there. So she like rushes to get her sister Maddie, who's like left alone, and she's like a toddler, maybe 2 years old. And so then she's running around with her sister, and then she finds Everett again, and they get in the car with two friends who are hunting the UFO down. They're gonna like go find this UFO. They're chasing it, kind of thing, like because people are reporting it in the sky on the highway. While they're in the car, Everett, keeps rewinding his tape, and then they play the chant as the car is driving,
Yeah.
and the driver of the car, which is like friends of theirs, he like and the front passenger as well, like they start like looking up, like they get like transfixed by it, and then the car, they almost crash, and this freaks Faye out. She's like, I'm done. Faye, at that point, Faye's like, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm gonna take my baby sister Maddie, and we're gonna get out of here. And so, which they were just like, okay, we'll take you back. It's not like they're that far out of town. Like it's a small town. They're like, let us just take you back. But Faye is in freak out mode, and so she does the quintessential stupid horror movie thing, which is run into the woods. You're just like, come on, Faye. You're supposed to be the smart one here. And no, you're just running hysterically into the woods with this alien out there. So we all know, at that point, I'm like, okay, I know how this is going to end. It's not a surprise what happened. What are your thoughts?
After just praising this for its magnificent plotting and everything, I will say that is the one moment that kind of took me out of the movie. Just because their reaction, let's go run off in the middle of the woods, seemed so at odds with how they had behaved the rest of the film. It's like, if nothing else, if you don't want to drive with these people because they're both under alien influences or whatever, that's fine. Why would you run through the woods? Why not just walk back along the road? So that part I was like, oh, and I agree with you at that point. I'm like, oh, I think I know where this is going.
Yeah. And if you need to get her into the woods because of how you want to end it, you could have easily had her and Everett going into the woods investigating something. Somebody called into the radio and said, "Hey, I noticed, that there's some burned trees in the woods. You may want to check it out." Like have it be more purposeful than making her the hysterical. I didn't like that they like made her it's of course it's a hysterical woman that, gets them into the woods. Yeah, I didn't like where they went with that.
Yeah, there are more satisfying ways to have them wind up in there. Like you said, they get a call. They could have been driving in the car and see a light, and Everett and Fair like, we're going to go investigate, and the other couple are like, well, we're not going in there, right? I mean, there are a bunch of
Yeah.
things you do,
And Everett follows her into the woods.
which is understandable.
Yeah. And then it's him and her and the baby Maddie, and they find like the charred trees. Okay, so we know something's going on here. And it's burnt around them, and then they see the UFO, they become mesmerized by it. You hear like the wind pick up, then the final scene, there's like a cut, and then the final scene, which I think works really well, is like you see the tape recorder in the dust and some footsteps. That's it. And then people leave the ball, and then it cuts to people leaving the ball game and going back to their lives. And these three people are just gone.
And yeah, that's how it ends, and it was a good ending. But I do have a question for you about the ending. Do you
Hmm.
think it would have worked better if we had never seen the alien ship? Or was the alien ship fine? Do you think you needed that?
No, I think that was given the low budget of this film and how they didn't have to use a lot of special effects, I don't think you needed that special effect at the end with the alien ship. I think you could have just done it with the sounds because this is such an audio focused film.
Yes.
Just that the windmill rushing sound of the wind, and just sort of you could have done some shaky camera stuff like a la Blair Witch style, and you could have achieved the same effect without doing this CGI alien ship.
And the effect was fine. It
Yeah.
was just I think that also it was an unnecessary confirmation of the story. And what I mean by that is that this whole movie is about people who have bits and pieces of knowledge, don't know what's going on, make stuff up. But at the end, it's like, oh, aliens. It almost would have been better if it ended with, like, a reaction shot of the characters and then fade to black or something.
Hmm.
Or even not see what they're looking at, but then just see like the tape recorder sitting there in the field.
Hmm.
So something's happened, but we still don't know what because the characters don't really know what's happening.
Right. And of course, we make assumptions based on the story that happened with Hollis. It's the same footprints in the dry ground going nowhere. And so, you're obviously you're going to make that, you're going to jump and make that mental leap of abduction. But one other thing from a stylistic standpoint, I really didn't love about this film is there are times when it pulls you out to do these like black and white um shots of like you're watching it from like a Twilight Zone episode. It's like you're the viewer watching a Twilight Zone episode and you're seeing these characters in the film running around in black and white and on like an old looking TV. To me, that I didn't like that. It pulled me out of the film, and I didn't think it added anything that helped gave the film. It was trying to be artsy. It was the director trying to be artsy, and I don't think it added anything to this film.
Now, I didn't mind having the whole paradox theater thing as like a framing device. Hey, you're watching this show. That was kind of cute. It was an interesting, and it's a nod towards, the sort of stories that this particular film tried to not imitate, but emulate, right? I mean, it is like a Twilight Zone episode. And I thought that was fine. Building it in, though, to the actual flow of the story and not just the frame, yeah, it just didn't really add anything to it. And it kind of really called attention to itself, which was unnecessary.
Yeah, it was annoying and pulled you out of an already kind of tight story.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, well let's wrap this up. So what did you like best about the film?
For me, that opening scene, the one that you hated, or at least didn't like, I thought was great. That was such that opening basketball sequence, the first like 5-10 minutes are just such an amazing use of layered visuals and audio to kind of, and bits of dialogue to rapidly create a lived in world
Hmm.
and to introduce our main characters in a way that makes them feel very natural and you can immediately understand their relationship. I thought that was just an amazing opening.
Just watch it with the subtitles on, is my warning about that. So, what I like best is the long shot of the camera, taking you on a tour through the town at night, where you see like some of the homes, the WOTW radio station, the switchboard operator place, the basketball game. It was just a really cool shot that immersed you into the movie, and it shows the skill of the director and the cameraman. So definitely well done.
And your least favorite thing?
I debated between the opening scene with all the slang and the fast talking, or the black and white pullouts of the Paradox Theater. Ultimately, I fell with the black and white pullouts is the thing I liked the least. I think you totally could have done away with it. I don't think you needed it even as a framing. I don't think you definitely didn't need it throughout to pull you out of the actual film. I just think it was too artsy, unnecessary, didn't add value, and frankly annoying. Pulled you out of the film.
For me, it was the alien ship. I thought that was an unnecessary confirmation in a movie that is about the unreliability of the stories and information we're getting.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree that that also could have gone, and you could have done a lot more with just sound, rev up the sound, and maybe some shaky camera, or just yeah, or you could say a lot more in other ways. So, final panda rating.
Well, I'm gonna go for 4.5 audiophile pandas because I love this
Oh,
movie.
you really like this film.
I
Okay.
really like this movie.
Okay, wow, solid. Okay, so I did 3.5. I
Okay.
too liked the film, but I would say I didn't like it as much as you. The annoying opening hook plus the black and white
Yeah.
pullouts is why it lost points for me there. But it's a solid film, and 3.5 out of 5 is good. And for a directorial debut film, like I'm looking forward to seeing what else this director, let me get the director's name again for you all, Andrew Patterson. I'm looking forward to what else he has to offer, because I think this is a really strong start for a director, and this is one it's worth watching on a Friday night.
Thank you for listening to Stream On. Join us next week when we'll be reviewing Better Watch Out, currently streaming on Netflix. Stream On is a production of Steph and Jeff Wrights Media. Reproduction of this podcast without written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved. 2020.